Hey y'all, it's Kate from the Literary Apothecary and welcome back to my channel. I am back with another Battle of the Books 2024 edition video. This is going to be the last video in this series. I'm just going to wrap up our quarterfinals, semifinals, and final round all in this one video because these rounds go really fast because there's less books to talk about in each one. So I usually try to combine the last 3 rounds into one video. So first we're going to start with our quarterfinals. We have a top 16, now we need to narrow it down to a top 8. So our first matchup is the Bloodstones versus the Three Musketeers. This is a self-pub fantasy, Asian-inspired, which I really enjoyed, but I think it's going to get better as the series goes on, with a classic swashbuckling tale that I had wanted to read for a long time and just hadn't gotten around to it. I think I'm going to give this one to the Three Musketeers because I really enjoyed that, and it made me enjoy the story more, whereas I think the Bloodstones and that series is just going to get better the more we go on. So this one I'm going to give the Three Musketeers. And don't mind me as I write down because unlike the other videos, I have to keep track in here and figure out who goes up against who in the next round, and so I have to take much more notes than I usually do. Usually the who's against who is on breaks when I'm not filming. So our next matchup is the Queen's Gambit versus Agent as the Stars. And this one I have to give to the Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis because I absolutely loved that book so much. I was so engaged the whole time. Agent of the Stars I absolutely loved, but there were some things that I would have changed if I could. And so I'm going to give this one to the Queen's Gambit because there's not a single thing that I wanted to change about that book. Next up we have I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones versus Upscaled by Joseph Jolie. This one, as much as I loved that baby dragon, and I literally just recommended that in a comment in another video where someone asked me for a recommendation of they like fantasy books and they like dragons, and Upscaled immediately came to mind along with Miss Percy. I recommended both. This one I have to give to I Was a Teenage Slasher because Stephen Graham Jones took the slasher genre and turned it on its head, and this made Stephen Graham Jones an auto-buy author for me, and I'm literally finishing up another one of his books today, hopefully, Buffalo Hunter, which I have an arc for. So this round goes to I Was a Teenage Slasher because that book was incredible. Next up we have The Diviners versus Butcher and Blackbird, and this may be the hardest pick of this whole series of videos. The Diviners was a supernatural fantasy horror mystery historical fiction. It's like all the genres in one basically. I loved it. It took place in New York City in the 1920s, which is near and dear to my heart for whatever reason, versus Butcher and Blackbird, which was this crazy serial killer romance. I can't wait to read books 2 and 3. Now that 3 is out, I need to read 2 first. This one I'm going to give to Butcher and Blackbird because that opened my eyes to a genre I never would have even A, known existed, and B, known that I kind of liked. So I'm going to give this round to Butcher and Blackbird. Next up we have actually book 1 and book 2, well, in order, book 2 versus book 1 in the same series by the same author, which is so fun. We have How to Seal Your Own Fate, which is book 2 in the Castle Knowles Files series, versus How to Solve Your Own Murder, which was book 1 in that series by Kristen Perrin. Did I like book 2 or did I like book 1 better? Let me think about this for a second. Book 2 was really great because it followed trails that book 1 left. But book 1 made me really interested in this series and Kristen Perrin in general. And I wouldn't have read, obviously, book 2 if I read book 1. I think I'm going to give it to book 1 because I feel like that left me slightly less questions than book 2 did. Next up is Deadbeat versus The Crimes of Rooker Flynn. This is, of course, a Dresden book versus a fantasy YA kind of A.R. Witham book. It was so much fun, and I do need to read book 2 that I think just came out. I think I'm going to give this one to Dresden though, because I love the Dresden series so much and I can't wait to get back. I'm waiting for my loan from the library to come through so I can start my next immersion read of Dresden. So I think I'm going to give this one to Deadbeat. Next up we have Becky Lynch, The Man Not Your Average Girl versus Legacy of Brick and Bone. This is another one that is a really hard one for me because I love me some Becky Lynch, Rebecca Quinn, and I love me some Tainted Dominion, Crystal Matar writing. I think I'm going to give this one to the Becky Lynch book because while I loved Legacy of Brick and Bone and it tore me apart emotionally, and I do think it was like the perfect second book for that series, I think I liked book 1 slightly, just a teeny bit more than book 2, so I'm going to give this one to Becky Lynch. And even I am shocked that Legacy of Brick and Bone did not make it to the final 4 because that series I'm obsessed with. And if Crystal Matar is watching this, I need more right now. So then the last matchup of this round is the Legion of the Lost, which is a Joseph John Lee Spellbinders and Gunslingers series book versus Beach Read by Emily Henry, which was a absolutely adorable, fantastic romance. As much as I love Joseph John Lee's writing and I hope we get more from him, I think I have to give this one to Beach Read because that book gave me so many unexpected emotions that I obviously wasn't expecting. Legion of the Lost I loved, but I liked book 1 in that series the most out of those 3 in that trilogy. And to me, books 2 and books 3 just didn't quite hit me in the emotional level that book 1 did. So I'm going to give this one to Beach Read. That wraps up our quarterfinals. We have an Elite 8 now, which is The Three Musketeers, The Queen's Gambit, I Was a Teenage Slasher, Butcher and Blackbird, How to Solve Your Own Murder, Deadbeat, Becky Lynch, The Man Not Your Average Girl, and Beach Read. Now we're going to pare those down and get our final 4 out of that, our top 4 books. On to the semifinals. So first up we have The Three Musketeers versus The Queen's Gambit. I think this one I'm going to give to The Queen's Gambit because, as I said in the previous round, The Queen's Gambit to me was such a great, intriguing book that I wouldn't change anything about. The Three Musketeers I loved, but there were some parts that felt really long, and if I didn't have the audiobook playing along with me, I would have gotten but I probably would have gotten lost or at least tired of. So this one I'm going to give to The Queen's Gambit. Next up we have I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones versus Butcher and Blackbird. This is ironic because we have a teenage slasher novel, horror novel, versus a horror romance, serial killer romance book. And I really loved Butcher and Blackbird, and if it was up against a different book, it probably would have moved on, but I have to give this one to Stephen Graham Jones because that book was just too good. Next up, we have How to Solve Your Own Murder versus Deadbeat by Jim Butcher. This is a tricky one. I'm going to give this one to Kristen Perrin. I love Jim Butcher and Dresden, and Deadbeat was one of my favorite books in that series so far, but How to Solve Your Own Murder did so many different interesting and unique things that I think I have to How to Solve Your Own Murder just ekes out a win in this round over Jim Butcher, but it's very, very close. And then our last matchup in this round is Becky Lynch, The Man Not Your Average Girl versus Beach Read. And this one I'm going to give to Becky Lynch and Rebecca Quinn because that book did so much for my fandom and it made me appreciate not only Becky's wrestling, but just the wrestling industry in general so much more. It gave me so much more. They did a biography video of her in part of their Legends series, but it didn't touch on half the things her autobiography did. So I'm going to give this one to Rebecca Quinn's memoir, but that is a tough one because I loved Beach Read. It made me want to read more Emily Henry. But I also feel like as much as I want to read more Emily Henry, another reason why Beach Read is going to stay here is because I feel like I haven't read my favorite Emily Henry book yet. I loved Beach Read, but I feel like there's another Emily Henry book out there that is going to be my favorite. So this round will go to Becky Lynch. So that means our final 4 equals, let me see, The Queen's Gambit, I Was a Teenage Slasher, How to Solve Your Own Murder, and Becky Lynch, The Man. So 3, 5, 10, 13. Oh, this is getting so hard. So we have 4. We have to bring it down to 2 now. We have The Queen's Gambit versus I Was a Teenage Slasher. This one, again, I'm going to give to Stephen Graham Jones. And then we have How to Solve Your Own Murder versus Becky Lynch, The Man. This one I'm going to give to Becky Lynch. And that leaves us with I Was a Teenage Slasher versus Becky Lynch, The Man, Not Your Average Man. I think I have to give it all to Stephen Graham Jones because that book made me a Stephen Graham Jones fan and it made him an author for me. I love Rebecca Quinn and Becky Lynch, the wrestler, and I loved reading her memoir, and I will read it again. But I think it's a very close race. But I think my top read of 2024 goes to I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones because that book was just phenomenal. I think John will be happy with second place in this case, but holy cow, that was a hard one. So looking back on this series compared to last year, the first couple rounds weren't as hard as last year's were. It didn't get hard until we really got to narrowing it down to the top 16. Definitely, as you saw in this video, the top 8, the top 4, the top 2, and the top read. This video was the hardest out of all the videos I've had to film. There were some really amazing matchups here and some really great books. If any of these books that I talked about in this video, or any of my videos really, stood out to you, highly recommend going check them out, and do let me know what you think of them if you did. All of the books mentioned in this video will be linked down in the description below, and all of my videos in this series will also be linked in the description below. Let me know in the comments below which of these books would you have made your top book, and which of these books would you have chosen to move on in their respective rounds. Which choices surprised you the most? As always, keep reading, and I love y'all to the moon and back. Bye.